Hi everyone, this is Weasel D from Grim Press, and in today's video I'm going to cover one of our most popular product lines, 5E automatic effects. It might be a little longer than usual, but I've got a lot of things I want to cover, and to help with that I'm going to be breaking out each section with timestamps in the description below. That way you can either watch it straight through, or you can just jump to the section that you're most interested in. First of all, what is it? 5E Automatic Effects is a series of modules which aid game masters and players by automatically adding coding effects in the 5E D&D rule set on the Fantasy Grounds virtual tabletop platform. It can instantly add effects for all items, spells, class features, race traits, and feats found in the 5E core rulebooks. Although the 5E Automatic Effects module can be used standalone, they were designed from the ground up to work with the Equipped Effects extension created by Silent Ruin, which is listed for sale on the Fantasy Grounds Forge. Throughout this video, I will have the Equipped Effects enabled, since it's really a must-have for time-saving automation. You can find the links for purchasing 5E Automatic Effects from the DM's Guild, or Equipped Effects from the Fantasy Grounds Forge below. Believe me, you will not be disappointed in these cost-effective effects. We're talking about over 3,500 spells and power variations and over 500 NPC variations to help accomplish this magic. Speaking of magic, let me show you how simple this whole thing is. I've got two characters here that we're going to use to showcase what makes 5E automatic effects and equipped effects so special. Hoagie is a 4th level half-orc fighter, and Nuzira is a 4th level dark elf who has multi-classed in sorcerer and warlock. Now, rather than start with level 1 characters, I've picked a few who are a little more complex. They've already picked their specializations and they've already acquired a few magic items. Automatic Effects is available throughout the character creation process, whether it's using the character wizard, whether it's manually creating a character at a specific level, or whether it's just happening automatically in the background as your characters level up and they acquire something new. We take a look at Hoagie's abilities here. We can see those which he's gotten, his features, you can see his feats, we can see his traits, all those he's gotten based on his race and class. On his inventory sheet, we can see where he has a Boots of Speed, which are attuned and identified, as well as a Potion of Healing, which has not been identified. Nuzira, on the other hand, has several identified potions of healing. She's got a Stone of Controlling Earth Elementals, and an attuned and identified Pearl of Power. Now, I'm making a distinction about identified or not because Equipped Effects respects that state, and it won't accidentally give a player an action and a power for an item that they don't know what it does yet, so you're able to keep those things a secret till it's appropriate. Neither one of these character sheets has any spells or powers listed. So to make the magic happen, all we have to do is take the character and put them onto the combat tracker. And when we do, you'll immediately see that their character sheet gets populated with all of their abilities related to their class, their race, and any equipped items that they might have. If you've ever spent hours as a DM or a player trying to get all of your actions set up and then having to do it again every time a character levels, I've got to believe that your jaw's on the floor right now for how easy that was. Now, there might be a few small adjustments you need to make, and I'll cover those more in the following sections. However, the vast majority of the work is already done for you. You can see here where Hoagie's Boots of Speed show up, but his Potion of Healing does not. The Potion of Healing over here on Nuzira does. And since he had those Boots of Speed equipped and they had an effect that automatically on them, you can see here where that effect was applied in the chat window here. You can see where the effect is existing on the player up top. With the other items you have, you've got abilities and effects that are underneath of the items and features, and we'll go over that in some of the other sections a little bit more in detail for you. So let's get into some of the specifics. All the spells and powers can be found in the spells sidebar. Depending on how many other things you have loaded up, you'll find it probably pretty useful to use the grouping up top here to help you narrow down the list for the ability that you're looking for. Additionally, you'll be able to use the standard filtering down below to select things such as the source and the level in order to whittle down the powers that you're looking for. In this case, what we want to do is we want to add the Infestation spell over to Nuzira. So it's as simple as taking the spell from the spell list and dragging it over and dropping it on our character, fully coded from the automatic effects. Now you may notice that there are some spells that are listed here multiple times. That's because of the way Automatic Effects is released. Each of the modules covers a core book, and some of these spells have been released in more than one book. So depending on what modules you have, you might have the spell listed more than once. Functionally, they work exactly the same way, and you can bring over whichever one makes sense to you. Depending on how you've chosen to share your modules, these powers can be added by either players or by the GM. If players want to open the links to the Dungeon Master's Guide, they must have the player version of that module loaded. That way, players can open the links for equipment, spells, class features, feats, and race features. However, magic items are not part of the player version, which means they cannot be accessed that way. The authors created a very elegant solution using a little-known feature called record sharing. Right-clicking on the story entry and selecting Sharing, Share Record as the DM while the corresponding module is loaded will ensure that all the records that are linked to by this module will be shared with the player. In this case, I've gone ahead and shared everything about Tasha's Cauldron of Everything. What's important is that only the information which is necessary for the players and not the entire source book is being shared. Every power in this module series is preceded by one of the following tags, which isn't copied over to the combat tracker when applying effects. It's just there to help you as the player or you as the GM know when and where and how to apply the various effects. If you see the euro symbol, it indicates the effect is equipable or an equipped effect. Activate the effect when equipping, or let the equipped effects do this for you automatically. These effects can also be found under the custom effects in the effects tab, which I will be covering in a later section. If you see the $sign, it means that's a situational effect which will be added to yourself. These will not activate automatically, and they always need to be activated by the player or the DM. Because they are set to self, you don't need to set a target before you activate the effect. If you see a hash mark, it means that the effect can be targeted to another creature or yourself. First you target the creature or creatures, and then you click on the effect button, or you can click and drag the effect right to the target. If you see a $sign and hash mark together, it indicates that there's some special functionality with this effect that you'll want to take a look at. Additionally, you will see when there's indications about the word note. Notes indicate that there's something important that the GM or player needs to know. Now, I mentioned this before that not every power can be automated. The author uses these notes sections extensively to guide you through any adjustments that you might need to make, recommendations on how to do things, and links to other assets which are needed to help the player with the action. You might also see a reference to an NPC. This can be a variety of animate and inanimate objects, which I will also cover in a later section. Let's take a look at combat superiority over here on Hoagie. You'll notice that there is a note available. Now, depending on how you display your actions, you might see the note when you expand the effects in the detail summary or in the group display, but it's important to note whenever you see the word note that there is more information here that you want to take a look at. So you just simply click on the ability here and it brings up the notes next to it. In this case, since the player has options to pick from, this note gives us all of those options. It provides links to all the choices that the player can make, and it also recommends setting up a new power group based on strength or dexterity, depending on the class source for which you're getting these powers. Now, I know that strength is spelled wrong, and that'll be fixed. It's okay, though, because I don't think Hoagie could spell strength if he needed to. Let me show you how to do that. The easiest thing to do is to first change the grouping category on combat superiority by altering the text of its group name. In this case, I'm going to make the power group be called combat superiority. Now that we have our new power group, what we can do is we can simply take the abilities that we want over here and drag them into the group. Since we drag and drop them inside the power group, they'll inherit the group name for the section we're bringing into. So in this case, Hoagie is going to select feigning attack, and he's also going to select parry. And now we have, in addition to the primary ability, which explains us how to use them, we have the coded effects for those items. Next, what we want to do is, since Hoagie is using combat superiority, which is strength-based, we'll want to bring up the properties of the power group, and we'll want to change the ability to strength. This makes sure that anything which has a DC save will be coded appropriately. Lastly, it will be based on the number of uses. By putting these into their own power group, we can make sure that based on the number of uses that Hoagie has on any given day, we can tie all these effects together so that the use of one of them is a pool of available effects for the entire day. Next, let's take a look at savage attacks. The note here tells us that there are additional critical dice that we need to set up in the weapons group's properties. This one's pretty easy to do. All we have to do is go up to the weapons properties, bring up the properties, and in this case we're going to add an additional critical dice because this savage attack effect is always on. It's not an effect we have to turn on or off, so in this case we're using automatic effects just as a way for the player to realize that something else has to be changed on their character sheet. Many abilities have different effects based on scaling. For example, on Nuzira, we have the Healing Light feature. She has the ability to heal up to her Charisma modifier. Now, in her case, it's only +3, but the ability has been coded to provide all the possible choices for the player. That allows them to perform a single action instead of having to do it multiple times. Just like we had to do with Hoagie, we'll go into preparation mode and we'll change the number of uses for the pool's power that's been identified in both the power note as well as the original source. In this case, we're going to go ahead and change the number of uses for the pool to 5 uses. Then we go back into our combat mode. We have the number of uses we could use on any given day. In addition to the effects which are tied to your Actions tab, Automatic Effects provides over 350 custom effects that can be applied directly to characters. While the primary purpose of these effects is their interaction with the Equipped Effects extension, this can be used for a variety of situations where the DM just needs to get to an effect quickly. It's really up to you how you want to use these in your game. Perhaps you want to apply them to NPCs in your combat tracker, or perhaps an effect, magical or otherwise, needs to be applied to a player. Suppose Nanami, our tiefling wizard, suddenly dives behind a rock during her duel with a Kenku warlock. Now you could try to remember which modifier needs to be applied during the roll, and then click down here to apply it, but what happens if she stays there for another turn pinned down? You have to remember to do it again. Instead, we can simply take the effect cover, and we can drag it over to her character, which immediately applies the effect in place on the combat tracker. Now, after returning the farmer's child to the town, the local sage blesses Nanami and her group with a magical fire protection for a short period of time. I can get a little creative here, and I can apply the Armor of Fire Resistance effect onto the character. This way, I can move quickly as a DM, and I have to track down the coding syntax for an effect which I already know exists. For the sake of the story, I could even come in here further, and I could change the description to say that this is for a blessing so that people know what it is that's not actually an armor of fire resistance. Within the core rulebooks, you will often find tables that produce some sort of random effect from an ability or an item. Automatic Effects has enhanced this by providing rollable tables which produce actual effects that you can use. There's a reference story which gives you more information about the various tables, but since they'll all be linked in the appropriate locations, I thought I'd just show you a few in practice. Fei Rin is an impulsive, changeling wild magic sorcerer who looks forward to the chaos created by wild magic surges. Let's say he's just grabbed a cursed figurine and is going to suffer from the effects of short-term madness. You can see from the automatic effects table that all these entries with the link icon have some sort of effect output that you can use to drag on the character. I'm going to use manual dice entries here just so I can show you a few specific examples. So Fei winds up being paralyzed, and you can see the effect output in the chat window. You can simply take this effect and drag it over the player, and then you can have the effect coded and ready to apply. In this case, I'm going to drop it onto the character, and you'll see that I now have the short-term madness power with paralyzed effect. If I simply apply it targeting itself, you will now see that Fei Rin is paralyzed up here in the combat tracker. Next, let's take a look at Fei Rin's Wild Magic Surge. Automatic Effects has created both a table to help you determine if the surge goes off, as well as tables that give you the results of those actions. As you can see when compared to the original Wild Magic Surge table from Player's Handbook, this gives you all the effects that are in place and available for you to use as a GM. So once again, Faye, in his impulsive behavior, goes ahead and he casts his spell. In this case, we're going to have the effect go off, and then after that effect, we are going to see what happens to him. In this case, he's cast the Grease spell centered on himself. Now, because Faye casts wild magic and hopefully surges so often, we've actually gone ahead and created a power group ahead of time, just so it makes it really easy to apply. This way, when we take the effect and we drop it into the power group, it puts it in the group here for our use. And you'll see that the ability is fully coded and ready to use. In this case, we are going to cast the Grease effect and target everything in this area by making a casting save and then applying effect to all of those individual people. Previously, I showed you how automatic effects work with items, and I wanted to cover that a little bit more in detail. Automatic effects provides not only effects for common adventuring gear and magic equipment, but for race or class abilities which can be treated like items, such as the Aarakocra's Talons or Monk's Unarmed Strikes. As a reminder, items will need to not only be equipped, but identified and attuned where appropriate. If you happen to have a magic item which has an effect but does not require attunement, such as a Ring of Animal Influence, the player won't have the action available to them. But the effect will still show up on the combat tracker, but it'll only be visible to the GM. Speaking of visibility, there are custom effects for cursed items as well. Bring those up and I'll show you. In cases where the item is cursed, the effects will be hidden from the player regardless of identification status. Let me show you a few examples with Xandra Cochran, an Aarakocra Light Domain Cleric. I figured that since all the automatic effects are coded to take advantage of Fantasy Ground Unity's lighting effects, he would be the appropriate choice for this part of the video. Let's take a look at some of those equipped effects again. When we equip the Mace of Disruption, what we'll see is the lighting is automatically applied and it reveals what's hidden beyond in the darkness. The effects are showing over here on the combat tracker, the first effect being the lighting, followed by the second custom effect. That is using coding to determine whether or not the creature being hit is a fiend or undead, and if they are, they take an additional 2d6 radiant damage. We also have the power over here on the Actions tab, which shows the additional effect that we can apply. Since it's situational, it's based on whether or not the target has a certain amount of remaining hit points, in which case it qualifies. But it cannot be automated, so when we're ready to use the power, all we have to do is target the creature, then we can have the creature, we can cast our spell against it, and then if they pass or if they fail, we can apply the effect appropriately. A torch is a good example of another common item that automatic effects uses in order to provide some additional benefit. In this case, let's go ahead and equip the torch. And what we'll see here is that in addition to the lighting, it also handles the damage for the one fire appropriately. Lastly, we should talk about character traits and features that can provide an armor-like or a weapon-like effect. In this case, we'll take a look at the Aarakocra's Talon trait. This is a natural part of the character and not something that has to be equipped. Automatic Effects handles this in a similar way, providing you with a power effect that you can use to slash your target. You can simply cast it, which causes the attack to go off, and then you can use the damage. Now, depending on the frequency of use, some players prefer to keep their attacks available in the weapons section, so Automatic Effects has provided a link to an actual item coding that you can use as well. In this case, we'll go ahead and drag it over to the weapons section. You now see you've got a fully functional item, and if you check back your inventory, you'll see that the item actually exists here as well. If we take a look at some of the other items that are available, you'll see that Automatic Effects provides many of them, including the scaling ones, such as the Monk's Unarmed Strike. This way, you don't have to make the changes yourself, you can just put the new item on there. One thing to note, though, is the inclusion of all of the dragon scale mails. In the original DM's version, this was just a single item, which showed you all the variants. Automatic Effects has gone ahead and created all those variants for you, shown here on this reference table. This way you can equip the specific items and gain all the appropriately coded benefits. As you may already know, spells and spell scrolls are practically the same thing. The only major difference is that they use a fixed DC based on the scroll level, not the caster's ability modifier. Automatic Effects has spell scrolls for all scrolls. That means when a player equips the scroll, they will have the power added to their Actions tab for immediate use. You can see that here when I equip these scrolls onto Xander. I move over to the Actions tab, and when we look at our items at the top, we'll see that I now have the scrolls of Bless and Raise Dead and Shield of Faith ready to use, all with the appropriate abilities directly underneath them. Something to note is that for magic weapons and armor, Automatic Effects takes advantage of the template system of Fantasy Grounds, rather than having to create every single specific magic item. So if you're searching for a corresponding effect, you will find the Armor of Astral Resistance and Dragon Slayer instead of Chainmail of Astral Resistance and a Dragon Slayer Battle Axe. Now this was done for several reasons. There is only one effect that functions for multiple items, including homebrew ones. It's compatible with equipped effects when using items from the core rulebooks, and it's easy to adjust to suit your own needs. Remember, you can always copy a spell or custom effect within your own campaign and modify it. Equipped effects always prioritizes your version. So let's do a little cleanup here, and I'll show you what it looks like with the templates when I equip an item. First, we'll go ahead and we'll unequip our scrolls, and then we'll go ahead and equip the Chainmail of Acid Resistance. What you'll see in our equipped items section is that it says Armor of Acid Resistance rather than Chainmail of Acid Resistance. But all we really care about here is the underlying corresponding effect. If we open up the link to that item, you'll notice that it gives a link to the item template and not to the specific magic item. There's nothing to worry about here. It's working exactly as expected and just providing additional flexibility for all of your items. Now, just a couple more quick things. First is I want to talk about charges for a second. We'll use the Wand of Magic Missiles. You'll notice that when you equip an item that has charges, Automatic Effects handles the charges appropriately when you equip the item. In this case, the Wand of Magic Missiles gets 7 charges, and they're automatically applied here for you, so you can go ahead and use them. You may have noticed also throughout this video that I've got a custom magic item here, this Lantern of Obedient Flame. Now, I'm not going to go too much in detail here because it really isn't an appropriate video for it, but I've previously written an article on the Grim Press blog which talks about how to create your own custom magic items for your players. If you want to stop by and check it out, I encourage you to do so. There are a couple of places within Automatic Effects where NPCs related to powers and spells come into play. Most notably, it will be on any power, spell, or item that has some sort of creature or arcane object summoning. Sometimes these NPCs will be the standard ones from the sourcebook, and other times they might be ones created by Automatic Effects to be used as anchor points for spell effects such as Light. Let's take a look at a couple of those. We'll go back to Nazira, who had a Stone of Controlling Earth Elementals. Now, when we take a look at the original DMG item and the spell, you'll see that there aren't any links to the actual NPC that you are summoning. However, when you look at the equipped effect over here, you'll see it references an NPC. When we open up that item, what we'll see is a couple things. First, you'll see the item template link, which I discussed in the previous section, but you also see a link to the NPC being summoned. This allows you to just quickly drag it over to your combat tracker, and then from the combat tracker you're able to drag it onto your map. I'll also point out the Conjure Elemental spell here. Now, this is kind of unique because it doesn't just summon one kind of monster, it summons a class of monsters. So the link in this case goes to the class index from the reference guide. From there, you'll be able to scroll down, and you'll be able to find the section on elementals, and you'll be able to pick the one that's appropriate for you to summon in this case. As a drow, Nazira also has access to Dancing Lights. This is a good example as part of her drow magic because it allows us to create multiple NPCs that we could also apply lighting effects to. So in this case, we'll take a look at the Dancing Lights here. Once again, it references an NPC, and when we bring up the ability here, what we'll see is that we have references to the NPC Dancing Lights. Now in this particular case, we have the ability to create up to 4 of them. So what we'll do is let's go ahead and drag over all 4 of the Dancing Lights over onto our combat tracker. Now, what we can do is, rather than taking the time for Nazira to go ahead and target each of these, we can just simply take the lighting effect from beneath the ability, and we can drag it on to each of our items. Once this is all set, it's just a matter of making the NPCs visible and then dragging them onto the map. You can see as we add them to the map, each one of them has the light source that is used to put around them on the map, lighting up the effects appropriately. 5e Automatic Effects for NPCs contains hundreds of effects for NPCs' traits, actions, legendary actions, and lair actions that are not parsed correctly or need some extra information to improve how they can be used by the DM. The entire monster manual has effects coded for its NPCs this way, but Automatic Effects has also updated all of its other modules to add NPC effects where appropriate. Here's an example. This screenshot shows what a beholder looks like when it's added to the combat tracker without automatic effects. Take note of all of the green squares. The beholder is a good example because there's so many things that are missing that can be improved upon, including some missing lair actions. Now look what happens when we add the beholder to the combat tracker with the power of automatic effects and equipped effects together. When we open up the abilities at this point, you will now see that there are fully coded effects in all of the sections where the green squares are, showing us what additional information we have available to the DM, and they can apply those to the targets as necessary. This is including all the way through the special lair actions at the end here. And you really want to make sure you've got those when you want to give your players a real challenge. A lot of features in 5e are purely generic, with the same feature used for different PCs. As awesome as equipped effects is, this can sometimes cause a conflict where it is unable to update the effects on the combat tracker properly, especially when a spell name conflicts with a monster feature. Automatic Effects has NPCs which are provided to help solve this name matching automation. There are details provided here within the module, but I wanted to show you how the process can be a bit more automated for you. When we have a naming conflict, an NPC is being created with a star next to its name. This same star trick is also used for NPC features to help differentiate them. Let's take a look at one of these, the Shadow Dancer. Let's go ahead and add it to the combat tracker. Then we'll look up and we'll find the corresponding Shadow Dancer here in our list of available NPCs. Now what you'll notice is when you compare the original NPC Shadow Dancer with the star NPC Shadow Dancer, you'll see a couple things. First off, we see that the original one in the green box here shows that we are missing a part of an effect. Automatic Effects and Equipped Effects has gone ahead and added that for us automatically. But you'll notice that the second one, Shadow Jump, doesn't show up here on the initial NPC because of that naming conflict that we were talking about. However, when we added the starred version of it, you will see that the ability properly shows up with the effects necessary to run them for the encounter. I'll do one more example because this covers a potential conflict where the wrong ability is loaded rather than an empty one. In this case, when we bring up the Adult Red Dragon and we add it to the combat tracker, you'll see where it adds the missing legendary resistance, but you'll notice that the Earth Tremor effect is totally different here than the one that was on the original. That's because of that name conflict that we were talking before. When we go ahead and add the starred version of the monster and we look at the effect there, you'll see that it properly has the effect which matches the original one. Because of licensing restrictions, these NPCs with the stars on them have to be stripped down, removing their lore and tokens. That's why this one is showing up with a generic token versus the original token that's over here. I recommend that if you plan on using any of these NPCs which are name conflict, that you take the time to update those NPCs yourself, adding back the missing data and tokens, which you're allowed to do assuming you own all the source material. I wanted to wrap up with a review of some of the things in Tasha's Cauldron of Everything that really help to reinforce what makes Automatic Effects such a great product. First off, it's one of the largest modules with over 1,000 powers, NPC variations, and custom effects. It includes everything you've come to expect in an Automatic Effects release, covering all the features that I've already covered earlier in this video. This includes powers for every class, including the Artificer, spell effects for every spell created as a spell scroll, spell effects, lighting, and vision effects for all the equipment, and fully prepared NPCs to use with summon spells or class features. Let's focus on the NPCs first. Tasha's features a new method of using variable stats for several classes and summon NPCs using templates. That is to say, you've got a summoned creature which winds up getting adjustments to its stats based on the player which summons it. all of the NPCs in Tasha's are a result of summoning spells, actions, or class abilities. The problem is that the templates aren't functional the way they are. To use them, you have to make a copy and adjust them manually. This makes them very difficult to use without prepping them in advance. Saphira is a level 5 Dragonborn Artificer. Let's take a look at her Steel Defender ability and the Steel Defender template. You can see here on the template that adjustments need to be made. They're referencing here that we have to see the notes, that this is the proficiency bonus, and when we come to the other tab, you can see a series of things that we need to do to make the adjustments. Now let's go ahead and take a look at the Steel Defender power, which is provided by Automatic Effects. Here you will see a link to the original feature, but you'll also see some information on how to use the Automatic Effects specific functionality. When we bring up this feature, we'll find notes on how to use it more effectively. First off, there is a table which gives us links to all the different Steel Defender variants. For speed, you can simply take the one that is appropriate for your level and drag it to the combat tracker. In this case, we're level 5, so we'll put a level 5 Defender over there. Now, it's likely in your own games that you'll probably want to make a copy of these so they can be named by your artificer and further customized. You'll also notice that the Improved Defender is handled similarly, with its own table instead of NPCs. You'll find that all the powers and features which summon creatures are handled in a similar way. They're all linked directly from the powers, but if you want, you can look up the tables directly in the references here within Fantasy Grounds. Unfortunately, not everything can be fully automated as it relies on the Fantasy Grounds effects engine. In this case, we're still going to have to make some adjustments. Here it tells us in step 1 that we are going to have to adjust by our Intel modifier. This is one of the reasons why you might go ahead and pre-configure that one change with your own NPC. So let's bring up our Steel Defender here. Let's unlock it. And in this case, we know that our intelligence modifier is +3, so we can go ahead and we can take the hit points up to 30. Now what you will notice though is that the other items, when we compare these to the Steel Defender template, have already been adjusted for us. Our saving throws and our skills and every other stat on here has already been adjusted. So honestly, you're making one edit versus all the other ones, and I think that's a huge benefit to you. The next thing the stamp tells us to do is that we want to go ahead and we need to apply the spell attack modifier from our effect over here to the defender in the combat tracker. Let's see how that's going to play out both before and after we make the effect. First, let's go ahead and we'll make the attack using the Force Empowered Rend. You can see here it's saying attack 0. When we make that attack in the combat tracker, what we'll see is, oh look, I rolled a 20, that's great. You'll see it's a critical hit, but you'll notice there's no modifiers added to it, it's just the base roll. However, once we take our effect and we bring that over to the defender, and we make that same attack again, what you'll see this time is it has a +6, which represents the spell attack modifier for that player. You're going to want to make sure to review the notes for each of these powers to make sure you're taking the appropriate steps to modify them correctly and which powers to apply to the NPC in the combat tracker. I've grabbed my good friend Milo Goodbarrel, Resident Know-It-All, to help me cover a couple of spells and powers to showcase for you. First off, let's take a look at Tasha's Caustic Brew. Remember to check the notes in your spells, as this one has a progressive effect which tells you how to apply it. In this case, depending on which spell slot you use, this spell does additional damage. So when Milo goes ahead and casts the spell against this dragon, normally he would apply just the base effect to do the ongoing damage here. In this case, the notes tell us that for every spell level above 2nd, we can add an additional higher level effect, and that the effects stack. So in this case, we'll cast it 2 levels above normal, and we'll go ahead and apply those effects 2 times. When it goes ahead and moves to the dragon's turn, you'll see that it rolled an additional damage for each of these stacked effects. Next, let's look at the new Druid Wild Shape option, Starry Form. In this case, the Druid has 3 possible forms to change into: the Archer, the Chalice, and the Dragon. Our spell provides the appropriate effects for each of them. There's also effect description text, so it doesn't do anything, but provides a tip on what the form does. And finally, it adds light to you while you're in that form. So if Milo decides he's going to change into the Archer form, he can apply the effect, You see the light show up automatically around him, and then here in the combat tracker it gives us additional description reminding us that as a bonus action we can throw arrows 60 feet away. Lastly, let's take a look at a very complicated spell, Tasha's Otherworldly Guise. This is another example where the notes are your friend. In this case, this spell has just got so much going on. You've got multiple abilities, and on top of that, the abilities are mixed up depending on whether it's from the upper planes or the lower planes. Plus, you got to deal with whether your weapons are strength-based or dexterity-based. This is something that certainly cannot be fully automated, but the notes tell us what we need to do, and so we're going to walk through that. In this case, we're going to choose whether we're going to take the power from the lower planes or the upper planes. So that's our first choice. Let's go ahead and apply the effect for the upper planes. And you'll see it's different here. It's got different immunities depending on which plane you're from. So we apply that effect first. We'll get rid of the starry effect. Put the Otherworldly Guise upper on. The next thing is whether or not our rolls are going to be, for our weapons, they're going to be strength or dexterity based. Milo is dexterity, so we'll choose one of the two dexterity effects, and then his spellcasting modifier is intelligence. So as a result, the effect that I want is the minus dexterity plus intelligence. And we go ahead and we apply that effect to him over here. And again, this makes sense once you read through the notes and you see exactly what the power does. And when you've got a player who's using these things, it's probably the good choice that what you'll do is you'll remove these extra effects that you don't need, because once that player knows which their spellcasting abilities are and their weapon modifiers, you can get rid of these other forms. You'll still need to choose both the upper and lower planes since those are variable, but these are just here to cover all the possible combinations for the players. Speaking complex, this new artifact in Tasha's, called Teeth of Dalvarna, is about as complex as it gets. Luckily, Milo knows people who know people, and he managed to get himself a set. I've already gone ahead and equipped them, so the base effect shows up automatically in my equipped items. When we take a look at the description here, we realize that this one item can have up to 20 different complex effects. You could take a look at all 20 on the source table, and depending on which tail you choose or which tooth you implant, you get a variety of different effects against your character, each with its own limits and bonuses and powers. And no two are the same. The problem is it's up to the DM to actually implement these things in Fantasy Grounds. Now with automatic effects, the table provided here instead is a functional table. Each of these implanted effects actually provides the functionality for the effect to be coded to be used by your players. And that is just phenomenal. So let's go ahead and take a look down here. We'll go ahead and we'll first pick up this Legend of Phantoms and Ghosts. We take the tail here and we drop it onto the player, and what you'll see on the player sheet here, and what you'll see here is that we get all the effects of the tail immediately available to us. Now I want to do one more. I'm actually going to choose this one right above it, the 1,000 Deaths of Jandar Sunstar, because we've talked previously about how automatic effects provides items for various effects. So this is a case of a note within a note, right? We had to read our first note to tell us how to use the teeth, and now there's a second note on this item that says, hey, open this guy up, and you'll see there's an additional effect here that provides an item for the Teeth of Dalvarna. In this case, you're going to bite them as a vampire. So what we showed before in the previous sections, we can simply take the item effect, drop it into our weapons section, and there we go. We've got a vampire bite that's doing piercing and necrotic damage. Thanks for watching. The link to purchase the automatic effects bundle is in the description below. While you can get the individual books, the bundle is really your best option because of the discount. If you already own some of the modules, you can still get the bundle and you get credit back for the ones you already own. Feel free to check out our socials, and we'd love to have you join our Discord community, filled with great people and regular giveaways.